Half the world eats rice every day, not as one option among many, as the primary caloric foundation of daily life. Approximately 3.5 billion people depend on rice as their main source of energy. More human beings are kept alive by rice than by any other single food. This did not happen accidentally. It happened because approximately 9,000 years ago in the Yangtze River Valley of southern China, a group of people made a decision that changed the trajectory of human civilization. They stopped moving. They chose a place, a plant, and a water system, and they decided to stay with it. They built the infrastructure to grow it, harvest it, store it, and distribute it. They solved the problems of flooding, drought, pest, and blight one generation at a time through observation and experiment. They invented rice farming, and in doing so, they invented a way of organizing human life that half the world still lives inside. Tell me, do you eat rice daily? Drop it in the comments. The conventional explanation for why ancient humans developed agriculture, including rice farming, is the pressure of growing population and declining availability of wild food resources. Too many people, not enough game and wild plants, forced the transition to cultivation. This explanation has been substantially revised by modern archaeological research. The evidence from the earliest agricultural sites consistently shows that the transition to farming was not driven by scarcity. Early farmers typically ate a more restricted diet than the hunter-gatherers who preceded them. They were smaller and showed more evidence of nutritional stress. They worked harder. They were more vulnerable to epidemic disease. If farming was not nutritionally superior to foraging, and if it required more labor and produced more health problems, why did people adopt it, and why did it spread so rapidly once it began? Archaeologist James Scott at Yale University, whose research on the origins of agriculture and the state has challenged the conventional narrative, argues that the answer lies not in individual nutrition, but in the specific properties of storable grain crops, including rice, that made them uniquely useful for the emergence of political authority. Rice, like wheat and barley, is storable. It can be harvested, dried, and kept for months or years without significant degradation. It can be counted, taxed, confiscated, and redistributed. It can support a population that is not producing its own food: soldiers, administrators, artisans, priests. Hunter-gatherer food, game, tubers, fruit, is mostly not storable. You cannot build an army on tubers. You cannot tax a nomadic forager effectively. You cannot concentrate population and political power without a storable caloric base. Rice farming did not develop because it was better for the people who farmed it. It developed because it was better for the people who could control its production. The invention of rice farming was the invention of the conditions for civilization, including all of civilization's costs. Wild rice, Oryza rufipagan, still grows in the wetlands of southern China, Southeast Asia, and India. It looks different from the rice you know. Smaller grains that shatter and fall from the plant when ripe, an adaptation for wild seed dispersal that is disastrous for harvest. The domestication of rice required, over thousands of years, the selection of plants with specific traits that were useful to farmers but would have been fatal to wild plants. Non-shattering grains that stayed on the plant when ripe, allowing harvest. Shorter dormancy periods, seeds that germinated quickly rather than waiting for optimal wild conditions. Larger grains with more starch. Plants that thrived in the flooded paddies that human water management created. This selection happened through a process that was partly deliberate and partly accidental. Farmers who saved seeds from the most productive plants were unconsciously selecting for farmed traits. The plants that survived the flooding, the weeding, and the harvest were the plants whose offspring were planted next season. Genetic analysis of modern rice varieties has allowed researchers to trace this domestication process in extraordinary detail. A 2011 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences established that all domesticated rice descends from a single domestication event in the Yangtze River Valley of China, approximately 9,000 years ago. One region, one process, all the rice in the world. From that single domestication, rice spread outward, to the rest of China, to Southeast Asia, to India, to the Middle East, to Africa, to the Americas. Each new region adapted the crop to local conditions, developing new varieties through the same unconscious selection process that had produced the original domestication. The extraordinary diversity of modern rice varieties, there are over 40,000 documented varieties, is the product of 9,000 years of farmers in different environments selecting the plants that worked best for them. All of it descended from the same original plants in the Yangtze Valley. Rice farming is not simply planting rice in wet ground. It is the construction and maintenance of a precisely controlled water environment. Flooded rice paddies, the terraced fields that cover hillsides across Asia in one of the most visually striking agricultural landscapes on Earth, require the construction of water channels, sluice gates, levees, and drainage systems that manage water depth to within centimeters across the entire growing season. Too much water kills the rice. Too little water allows weeds to outcompete it. The specific depth required changes at different stages of the growing cycle. The flooded paddy suppresses weeds, maintains consistent temperature, and provides a specific ecosystem, including nitrogen-fixing algae and bacteria, that fertilizes the soil. This system was not obvious. It was the product of thousands of years of empirical observation, experiment, and accumulated agricultural knowledge. The ancient rice farmers of the Yangtze Valley were discovering and refining a technology that is still in use today because, despite millennia of agricultural development, it has never been significantly improved upon for the specific conditions where rice grows best. The Ifugao rice terraces of the Philippines, hand-built 2,000 years ago and still in production, are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They are not maintained because traditional farming is charming. They are maintained because they work better than any modern alternative that has been tried. Agricultural engineer T.R. Sinclair at the University of Florida has studied traditional paddy rice systems and found that the integrated water management, pest suppression, and soil fertility maintenance achieved by traditional paddies is genuinely difficult to replicate with modern inputs. The traditional system is, in several measurable respects, more efficient than its industrial alternatives. The ancient engineers who built the first rice paddies were not doing simple farming. They were constructing integrated agricultural ecosystems, managing water, soil biology, pest pressure, and nutrient cycling simultaneously. They were doing it without any understanding of the mechanisms involved. They were doing it through observation, memory, and the transmission of accumulated knowledge across generations. If you want to keep following these origin stories of the things that built civilization, subscribe. One section left. Rice farming is socially different from wheat farming in ways that have had documented consequences for the societies that practice each. Wheat farming is primarily rain-fed and can be practiced independently. A wheat farmer works their field. The success of their field does not depend significantly on what their neighbors do with their fields. Rice paddy farming is fundamentally cooperative. The water management systems that make paddy rice possible, the channels, the shared irrigation infrastructure, the coordinated flood and drain schedules, require collective management. A single farmer cannot maintain a paddy water system alone. The water from one paddy affects the paddies below it. Decisions made upstream affect everyone downstream. This cooperative requirement has a measurable consequence. Psychologist Thomas Talhelm at the University of Chicago has published research comparing cognitive patterns in Chinese populations from rice farming regions with populations from wheat farming regions of the same country. His findings, published in Science in 2014, showed consistent differences in individualism versus collectivism, analytical versus holistic thinking, and social loyalty patterns, all correlating with whether the region's agricultural history was primarily rice or wheat. Rice farming populations showed more collectivist social values, stronger in-group loyalty, and more holistic cognitive patterns. Wheat farming populations showed more individualist values and more analytical thinking. Talhelm's interpretation is that 9,000 years of cooperative water management, sustained across generations, shaped not just the agricultural practices of rice farming societies, but the cognitive and social patterns of the people who practiced them. The ancient Chinese farmers who built the first rice paddies were not only feeding themselves. They were creating the social infrastructure, the cooperative norms, the collective decision-making, the dense interdependence that would characterize rice farming civilizations for the next 9,000 years. The terraced fields of Asia are not just food production systems. They are social systems, maintained in physical form. The water flowing through them is managed by the same cooperative logic that the ancient Yangtze farmers first established when they discovered that rice paddy farming required your neighbors as much as it required your own labor. The single-origin domestication conclusion from the 2011 PNAS study is well supported genetically, but the interpretation of archaeological evidence for rice farming timing has been revised multiple times and continues to be debated. Some researchers argue for earlier or multiple domestication events. James Scott's political economy argument that storable crops serve the interests of emerging states rather than individual farmers is influential, but has been criticized for overstating the political dimension and understating nutritional factors in agricultural transition. Talhelm's rice-wheat cognitive difference research is a striking finding that has been replicated in some follow-up studies and contested in others. The mechanism connecting agricultural history to cognitive patterns is not fully established, and alternative explanations for the observed differences have been proposed. What is well established? Rice was domesticated in the Yangtze Valley region approximately 9,000 years ago. Paddy rice farming requires cooperative water management that wheat farming does not, and rice is now the primary caloric source for approximately half the world's population. So why did ancient humans invent rice farming? Because a wild grass grew in the wetlands of southern China. Because some of the people living near it noticed that the grains could be eaten, and that the plants near their camps seemed to grow better than those further away, and that staying near those plants was easier than moving. Because they stayed, and because staying required managing the water, and because managing the water required cooperation, and because cooperation, repeated across generations, became culture. The terraced fields of the Philippines, built 2,000 years ago by people with no metal tools, maintained today by the descendants of the people who built them, are the physical record of that staying. 9,000 years of deciding every season that this place, this plant, this water system, this cooperation with these neighbors was worth maintaining. The rice in your bowl is the product of 9,000 years of that decision. It did not grow by accident, it grew because someone stayed. One question. Did you know that all the rice in the world, every variety, every type, descends from a single domestication event in China 9,000 years ago? Drop yes or no in the comments. If this changed how you think about something you eat, hit like. And subscribe if you want to keep following these origin stories. See you soon.